to Five Questions. I'm Jeff Blau, and this is Five Questions on Artificial Intelligence with Matt Kirk. Matt is the founder of Your Chief Scientist and the author of the O'Reilly book, Thoughtful Machine Learning with Python. He teaches engineering teams and startups how to use data to fuel their businesses. Hi, Matt. Thanks for joining us here on Five Questions.
Hey, thanks, Jeff. Thanks for having me.
Well, first, we'd like to hear what your definition of artificial intelligence is.
Yeah, so my definition of artificial intelligence is a little bit probably unlike what most people talk about. I tend to take the philosophical direction with artificial intelligence. I think when you think about what intelligence is, it generally comes down to reasoning. And in philosophy, there's two modes of reasoning, which is deductive and inductive reasoning. And realistically, what artificial intelligence is doing, machine learning, all of these different algorithms, is they're trying to build algorithms around reasoning. So, artificial intelligence, the umbrella term for a long time was about deductive reasoning. So, like, building heuristics into bots, robots. But then, recently, everything has kind of switched towards machine learning, which is about learning from data. So inductive reasoning, taking data and then turning it into some insightful bit of information. So that's a long answer of what I think artificial intelligence really is. It's just using algorithms to reason about data.
Well, as far as business goes, practically speaking, what can AI do for a business? Where have you seen it being applied effectively?
AI can do a lot, and I don't think a lot of people realize this, but artificial intelligence, machine learning has been used in businesses for decades already. I mean, if you've ever looked at financial projections, that in itself is a form of machine learning. Using linear regressions, that is machine learning. You're trying to take data and figure out, the patterns, figure out like how can I predict the future. I mean, obviously, we'd all like to predict the future, but I see it as a toolkit that's already being used. I mean, obviously, people are talking about, new frontiers like deep learning and some of the things that Amazon does, but businesses are already doing that. I think that, practically speaking, there are a lot of new things that are coming out. So a lot of new APIs and a lot of new techniques that we can apply to businesses, especially online for filtering out spam or figuring out like user patterns, which also I think helps build a business and helps scale the business much more.
Well, are there any particular kind of use cases that have been noteworthy to you?
Yeah, so I'd say that the ones that have been really noteworthy to me, I would say okay, two have been huge. I used to work at a company that did diamonds. They sold diamonds, which were really expensive, like $50,000 diamonds kind of stuff. And fraud detection was such a huge concern because obviously you don't want to sell a $50,000 diamond to somebody who can't pay for it. And obviously we could, you could manually go in and vet people out, but we spent the time to build a fraud detection, suite of tools so that even though there was somebody behind the curtain, so to speak, making sure that things were mapping up correctly, it really made them much more productive. So they could go through thousands of diamonds a day versus maybe a couple. So that was a really big lesson for me is this like the power of machine learning to help scale people more, effectively. I think, the other times I've seen machine learning used really well, I worked at a e-commerce company and there's that common use case of if you're buying this, you might be also interested in something else. And it's surprising how effective that is. It's like, hey, you're looking at this backpack. You might also want some carabiners to go with it. And I mean that affected the bottom line substantially.
Sure. Well, what role do you think AI should play in an organization's business strategy? And how can it be integrated into a strategy or plan?
I think that AI, it's very important for business plans because it comes down to the fact that machine learning AI, whatever term you want to throw out, is about modeling something. So, if you're building a business that you're selling products to customers or you're working with very common use cases, of course, you can build up intuition over time as a company, but with machine learning, you can start to model those patterns, which I think helps scale the business. And again, what I said before is I think that people are already doing this, even though they don't realize it with financial projections. I mean, that's a classic case of taking the data that you have and figuring out what's going to happen if I just, project this off into the future.
Well, do you think AI is really only for organizations with big data, large amounts of data, and organizations that have a lot of data analysts on staff, or can other smaller companies utilize AI as well?
I think AI and machine learning can really be used just about anywhere. I do, I've interacted with companies that have the 40 data scientists on staff and tons of Python developers, and you can uncover some really amazing applications. Facebook's a great example of doing that kind of stuff. But I think that even at the 3-person startup or even smaller, maybe you can tie into existing APIs that are out there, like IBM Watson, Google Azure ML, AWS, and you can actually tie into the work that 40 data scientists have already done. And I think that we're kind of at this point now where the tools are there that you don't have to hire a whole team of data scientists. And I think you can get pretty far. I'd also say that in the beginning, like as you dip your toes into AI and machine learning, I've seen a lot of people get a lot of value out of just doing visualizations, doing them well. So, like, using something like Looker or Tableau or, some R tools. In the beginning, like, it's about building a model. It's about building, just kind of a representation of what type of problem you're trying to solve.
Well, for companies like that that are kind of just starting to dip their toes in it, other than the visualization and visualization tools, how else can a company like that prepare for an AI effort? What kind of resources do they need? What kind of infrastructure do you think they have to have set up?
So my answer is based off of the first job that I had out of college. I worked for a financial firm doing quantitative analysis, and my boss told me something that's always stuck with me, which is 80% of your job is getting the right data, and it has stayed very true. I think what businesses can do to prepare is it's almost like preparing for tax day. It's like you want to store your data in a clean way so that you can actually get it. I've encountered this many times before where a startup will use a Mongo database or Couch or something like that and just shove data in there, and then down the road they want to analyze it, and it's difficult. So I guess my piece of advice is to spend the time to really understand what data you're capturing and how you want to store it.
Okay, Matt. And lastly, I mean, there's been a lot of hype around AI for years, at least, right? How can somebody who is again kind of new to it, just getting started with it, how can they separate reality from hype?
God, this has been on my mind for a little while. Obviously, there's been lots of articles about deep learning, adversarial neural nets, a lot of these amazing new technologies that are coming out and techniques. But you kind of notice that a lot of the companies that are applying this stuff tend to be Amazon, Baidu, Google, Microsoft, those sorts of companies. And the reality is that a lot of these technologies that are just coming out that are really fresh, they aren't really that applicable for small time startups or businesses just starting out. And I usually what it comes down to is a concept called statistical power, which is basically if you're going to do any sort of experiments or any sort of like mathematical modeling, you kind of need to have enough data before it starts to become valuable or like actually good enough. And I think the rule of thumb that I have is that when you're just starting out, like using the basics of machine learning or AI is usually a good step, because if it's really obvious, you're probably going to be able to figure it out using naive Bayes or decision trees or clustering. And as your product will mature, you can start to dip your toes into some of these more complicated methods. But separating the reality from the hype, it can be really hard. I think, because we get really excited as to what Baidu is doing or Google's doing. I think I've been just kind of taking the approach of like, trying to make sure I know where the information is coming from and, correlating that with where I'm at. So if it comes out of Amazon, then it's really neat, but it probably won't apply to me.
Yeah. All right. Matt, is there a website or Twitter account where any of our listeners can catch up with your activities?
Yeah, so I infrequently blog on my website, which is matthewkirk.com, and I tweet occasionally as well under MJ Kirk, so at MJ Kirk.
Great. Matt Kirk, founder of Your Chief Scientist. Thanks for talking with us and answering 5 questions on artificial intelligence.
Thanks, Jeff. Thanks for having me.